Hi, everyone. My name is Merit Steuven. I'm an Associate Director at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program, and I'm delighted to welcome the speakers for our first session of the day. The Five Big Ideas session is one we do often here at Aspen. It's an opportunity for the audience to look at a topic from different perspectives, and we will be following this session with a participant breakout, so you'll have an opportunity to reflect more on the things you hear from our five speakers. We're thrilled to have five wonderful speakers for the session who we'll be welcoming to the podium one by one to share their big idea for employee ownership with you. First, we'll hear from Jessica Gordon-Nemhart, who is the Professor of Community Justice and Social Economic Development at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the City University of New York. Next, we'll be hearing from Tammy Miller, who is the 39th Lieutenant Governor of North Dakota, and the former CEO of Border States, which is an employee-owned company. Following Tammy, we'll be hearing from Philip Reeves, who is the founding partner at Aspen Heritage. We want to shout out that Aspen Heritage just won a 2025 Skoll Award for Social Innovation. Congratulations to them. Next, we'll hear from Jesse Walker. Jesse is the books editor at Reason Magazine. And last but not least, we will be hearing from Leslie Wilson, who is Dean of the David W. Wilson College of Business at the University of Northern Iowa. And we're so excited for them to speak to you, but then also for you to reflect on their ideas in the breakout conversation afterwards. Thank you. I'll hand it off to Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. You can hear me okay, right? Yeah, sorry. I wear this mask for my 103-year-old dad. I just have 5 or 7 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Human beings in every era of history, on every continent, practice solidarity economics, mutual aid, and economic cooperation. These are strategies and practices older than capitalism that enable people to work together to survive and thrive. Human beings' first economic system was cooperative. For Black and brown people in the US, cooperative economics organization has been a means for collectively surviving and asserting and affirming one's humanity, especially in economics. Black Americans, for example, established cooperative enterprises in order to sustain their communities, feed their families, control their work lives, and share what they created in the face of economic exploitation and exclusion. In my book, Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice, I delve deeply into this history and document dozens of examples of Black co-ops. In particular, I found 3 prolific periods of cooperative business practices in the 1880s, 1930s, and 40s, and the 60s and 70s. And I believe the 2020s are coming up too, but the book was published already, as well as a continuous history of mutual aid and cooperative ownership. I want to focus today on 2 important benefits of worker cooperatives, which is an underutilized economic structure and practice. Worker cooperatives, if you don't know, are cooperative business enterprises owned and run by the employees, where worker owners are 100% of the owners. Worker owners operate under the same co-op principles: joint ownership, democratic governance, economic participation, return based on use, continuous education, concern for community, profit sharing, autonomy, etc. The first benefit to discuss is that worker co-ops achieve and transcend economic goals, and thus have the potential to transform agricultural, manufacturing, unionized industries, as well as service industries. And second, I'll talk about how worker co-ops transform work by practicing self-management and economic democracy, so that at the same time that they deliver economically, worker co-ops develop their members' social capital, leadership capacity, and achieve psychosocial humanist development. And I'll explain that in a minute. Case studies and surveys show that worker co-ops have many benefits, sorry about that. Increased productivity, better working conditions, control over work and work rules, benefits such as healthcare, retirement, etc., job ladder mobility, often better wages, less employment turnover, and asset building. Worker co-ops increase social capital and civic engagement, develop multiple types of leadership, stabilize communities, and recirculate resources multiple times in the same local community. There's less coercion, more self-management, communication, teamwork, which results in productivity improvements. Studies also find higher levels of training in worker cooperatives, and worker cooperatives are often started to meet community needs. For example, elder care, child care, healthy food, green industries, and/or to protect jobs. Cooperatives therefore create more engaged citizens and leaders with experience in advocating for themselves and their communities, and with experience operating democratically. These broad-ranging benefits can be seen most vividly when studying incarcerated worker co-ops. I first truly understood solidarity economies and cooperative economics as a humanist economics project when interviewing formerly incarcerated men about their experiences as co-op owners while in prison, operating incarcerated worker co-ops in Puerto Rico. Incarcerated worker co-ops are businesses owned solely by incarcerated people who are both members and board members and who self-manage the co-op. Mekelle Prison in northern Ethiopia and several prisons in Puerto Rico provide the best examples. In Mekelle, the inmates are allowed to organize licensed producer cooperatives, to access outside markets, and to borrow working capital. Incarcerated people established at least 31 cooperatives with over 900 incarcerated member owners, running successful co-op businesses in dairy, vegetable farming, cobblestone cutting and paving, metalworks, carpentry, plumbing, electric work, bakery, weaving, and sewing. All co-op members receive vocational training, financial education, and access to microloans and micro-insurance. Some receive advanced training. Members save about a third of their co-op income. They provide remittances to their family and spend the rest on necessities. Formerly incarcerated members are actually allowed to continue membership in the co-op with a reverse commute. In Puerto Rico, before the COVID pandemic, there were 5 incarcerated worker co-ops in various prisons. Incarcerated people themselves demanded co-op business education and the right to own their own co-ops. They petitioned for a change in the law so that they could do that, and then founded the first incarcerated worker co-op, Cooperativa de Servicio Argos, which is an artist worker co-op started in 2003 in Guayama Penitentiary. Soon followed a solar panel co-op, a technology co-op, a cafe co-op right outside the doors of the prison, and a sewing co-op in the women's prison, with hundreds of worker owners combined. From researching incarcerated worker co-ops in other countries and interviewing the former members in Puerto Rico, I learned that engaging in co-op business ownership and production is personally and socially transformative for incarcerated people. They gain skills, earn real money that they share with their families and use to pay debts. They grow in innumerable ways that enable them to reduce their sentences and return to society. Many of the members I interviewed had 99+ sentences, and after joining the co-op were out within 10 years. When interviewed, formerly incarcerated co-op members mostly commented on how transformative the experience was psychologically, socially, and spiritually. Because they worked cooperatively as members of a collective, they took responsibility for their actions, their businesses were accountable, they participated democratically, they made decisions with other members. They repeatedly remarked to me that when they were a member of the co-op, they felt like a human being and became what the co-op law said they were: co-op members, co-owners, decision makers, and leaders, not thieves or degenerates. So it really changed their lives. Owning and working their own co-ops is a humanizing experience that rewards their economic agency and gives them dignity and self-respect, counteracting the dehumanizing, disrespectful treatment they receive in prison. Given the various benefits and impacts, one can see why one study in Italy found that the cities with the most worker co-ops had the highest measures of economic well-being, health, general satisfaction, and political efficacy. Thank you.
Those were outstanding comments. I worked a lot with the men and women's prisons in the state of North Dakota, and I love that cooperative idea. I'm going to bring that back to the director. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to the Aspen Institute and Rutgers for hosting us. It's great to be part of this discussion, big ideas discussion. Some of you will see that my remarks are a little bit repetitive of yesterday, but I know there are many new people in the audience, so I'm going to share a little bit of background. But first, imagine as an employee going to work every day for the company you own, knowing you have a stake in the game, knowing you are empowered with transparent information, clear levels of authority, and consistent education, knowing you are responsible to take care of customers, your fellow employee owners, and your community, and knowing you will be rewarded for your good work with wealth creation in your ESOP and cash bonuses. This is the American dream, and this is what it's like to work at border states and thousands of other employee-owned companies. While I most recently served as the 39th Lieutenant Governor of the great state of North Dakota, I spent 29 years of my adult life working at an employee-owned company, and the last 14 years as the CEO and board chair of Border States. Border States is a $4.5 billion company headquartered in North Dakota with 130 branch locations in 29 states across the United States. There are currently about 3,500 employee owners. Border States established its ESOP 40 years ago and became 100% employee-owned and an S-Corp in 2000. I became the CEO in 2006, and at that time we were a $485 million company. During my term as CEO, we grew to $2.5 billion in annual sales, and our stock value grew from $161 a share to over $1,800 a share. We created tremendous amount of wealth for employee owners, and it was that employee ownership that powered that growth and continues to power the growth and success of the company. Fundamental to the ownership culture at Border States is transparency, education, empowerment, and accountability. This culture produces responsible behavior, which drives company performance, allows employee owners to amass tremendous amounts of wealth in their ESOP, and it helps create a duty for those employee owners to give back to the communities where they live and work. Successful ESOPs provide employee owners the opportunity to live the American dream, to work for the company they own. This is true for the 3,500 employee owners and thousands of retirees at Border States and millions of others who work for employee-owned companies in the United States. According to the ESOP Association, 10.8 million workers work in an employee-owned company. That's 8% of the private sector jobs. Only 8%. How can we double the number of employees working for the company they own in the next 5 years? Who's waking up every morning thinking about that? What an opportunity for employees. How can we have a more focused strategy? That strategy needs to start with increasing awareness, creating incentives, and providing more resources. Where is the go-to place, the one-stop shop for ESOPs? It would be great if we could develop robust Office of Employee Ownerships in every single state and at the federal level. I know there are a few states who are doing this and doing it pretty well, but just not even a handful. And the Employee Ownership Initiative, it was established in 2023 at the federal level. It's a new program of the U.S. Department of Labor. I had the opportunity of meeting Hillary yesterday and look forward to her work. But I don't know if you've looked at their site. The resources are still very limited, with a few federal and state resources and university resources listed. There is so much more that we can do. A great start, but more that we can do. I have done a number of ESOP transactions, several, and I know that each one is very unique, very complicated, and very expensive. How can we make this process easier, simplified, less expensive? How can we create a turnkey solution, a one-stop shop for ESOPs? You're probably thinking that's a little bit crazy because they are so unique, but I don't think it is. The transaction to do an ESOP, either for a new owner or even to merge with another ESOP, is very complicated. It takes accountants, attorneys, valuation experts, administrators, and if you do it right, a communication strategy to go along with it. It's really hard for people who are focusing on their business every day to put together that team. How can we create a turnkey one-stop shop? You think it's impossible, but we did it at border states. We had so many large utilities who turned over their whole supply chain to border states. We had contractors that turned over big projects, relighting a big office tower with the material, the equipment, the labor, the financing. We provided turnkey solutions. It was so much easier for those business owners to say yes. We can do the same thing for ESOPs. And as we're doing that, how do we create more awareness? Many of us are on advisory boards at our local universities. How many of our local universities are building employee ownership into their curriculums? I challenge each of you to go back to your hometowns, go to your local universities, and talk to them about including employee ownership in their curriculums. And lastly, when you're talking with them about curriculum, talk to them about internships. How many of our universities are providing internships specifically to employee-owned companies? Probably not any. At border states, every year we hire dozens of interns. None of them knew about employee ownership before they came to work for us. But after they experienced our culture, they were sold. So those are some of my ideas. I thought I could have 5 big ideas. Those were just 3. But I hope those will get you thinking about some things to do. Let's increase our resources at the federal and state level. Let's look at those turnkey opportunities and solutions to expand employee ownership. Let's talk to our universities, and let's talk about internships at employee-owned companies specifically. With that, we can double the number of employees working at employee-owned companies in the next 5 years, and let's all work to give every American worker the ability to live the American dream, to work for the company they own, and to share in the wealth that they've helped to create. Thank you.
I thought that was phenomenal. Too tall. Too tall. So I don't have sort of one big idea. I have one big framework. What has struck me in the last few months is that I don't think we're in the 51st year of the last 50 years. I think we're in the first year of the next 50 years. Geopolitics, populism, inequality, this is probably one of the most transformative times in history. Artificial intelligence. I think this is one of the most dynamic points in the modern era. And what strikes me about it is how employee ownership can play such a major role and be such a solution in that set. It was mentioned the Skoll Award. So we were in Oxford last week at a global conference, and the idea of employee ownership resonated in a way that we did not appreciate. I mean, Asia, Africa, the entire global South was bought into the idea of employee ownership. And then while we're on the topic, while A&H obviously was the recipient, that award is for the entire field. I mean, we're standing on work that research done by other folks, transactions done by other folks. And so by all means, congratulations to our team, but a huge congratulations for the entire field in elevating and giving more visibility to employee ownership. And so all that to say is, I think the time for employee ownership is now. We have a movement, we have a moment, and we need to capitalize on it. And so my big idea is, I think it's a great aim to try and double the number of employee owners. I would push even further. I think we need to 10x the number of employee-owned businesses in America. And so I think if you're working in this field, if you're in this room, I would challenge you to query, how do I 10x what we're doing? Because again, there's so much disruption, there's so much blue ocean that those ideas are possible. And so I don't have all of the answers for how you do that. But again, our work, for folks that don't know, we go into the market and we find companies that have never heard of ESOPs, and we help them convert to being 100% ESOP owned with a focus on low and moderate income Americans, directly trying to give working people a chance to own their businesses. But in doing that, it highlights the challenges of what it's going to take to 10x employee ownership, because we see it firsthand every single day. And challenge one is that awareness gap, period. Owners do not understand what employee ownership is. And I hope this is not controversial. I think a lot of effort in the past has been, the storytelling has been around the worker. And I think we need to move some of that storytelling to the owner. Because we can talk till we're blue in the face about how great it is to be an employee at an employee-owned business. But if we can't get business owners to want to do this transaction, it's all for naught. And so I think the expanding ESOPs effort that's bringing owner stories to light is huge. I think EOX, where I'm fortunate enough to be on the board, that's taking the message straight to owners, is huge. We need to push outside of the field to go to those owners, look at new media, look at podcasts, find the campaign that will work. We need to get owners to buy into this. And I think we also need to get owners to buy into this, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it is the smart thing to do for their business. Full stop, period. It is a better run business. The data shows that. All the CEOs here know that. That's the story we need to get out there. Two, it was just said, these transactions are super complex, like super complex. When we're dealing with the owner, they think they're signing up for an M&A transaction, and then we bring in this entire whole thing for employee ownership. Again, I know all the lawyers and the consultants and the trustees are like, I don't know if it's a policy answer. I'm sure there's people in the room working on that, but it's even just an education and awareness gap. If we can just talk about what it takes to do this transaction more visibly, that's huge. Even if we could say like, hey, here's a template term sheet, that's huge. Oh, here's a template purchase agreement. Here's a template ESOP plan. Again, I know that they're all customized, they're all unique, but 50, 60, 70%'s gotta be within a range that we can try and standardize. And that would significantly open up the aperture for more ESOPs. Third, capital. And this is where we spend all of our time. I think a few things about the capital point. Number one, this week, every business owner in America has tried to figure out how they can drop their cost. It happens that employee ownership does that in a real way. So even if we could say, look, how do we get every business owner to think themselves, I want to do a minority ESOP? It doesn't have to be 100%. If we can get you to do 30% ESOP, you'll probably get to 100% eventually. And 30%, 40%, that's the range where a bank will provide the senior capital. That's the range where you might be able to go to the SBA and get, I know it caps at 5 million, but it's something for the right size business. So I think bringing the minority ESOP component into the conversation is a huge way to get more people just engaged. But again, it has to be simplified and it has to have the ROI for the business owner. And that ROI is we're going to reduce your tax burden, we're going to engage your employees, we're going to give you more productivity, we're going to give you more retention. It's clear, like that is what we pitch. And then on the capital side, what is fascinating about our work is that we've taken employee ownership to the capital markets. And I'm here to tell you, they are receptive. Private equity is challenging. Debt markets are challenging. Public markets are challenging. Employee ownership gives folks a way to, they can see the alpha creation. Like everyone can get that if the employees are bought into a business, it's gonna do better. And so it's clear. That story, that narrative of just, again, ROI for the capital markets will bring capital into the space that will enable even deeper employee ownership. So if you want to go beyond 30%, you want to go 100%, we can do that. And so those are 3 ideas. My biggest thing with all of that is I think the field has the answers, but with all of that, we can't compromise our values. So we always have to keep the worker front and center, our values front and center, and make sure that we do it in a way that can do for everybody. Thanks so much.
Hello. So the idea I'm going to talk about is transpartisanship. And in particular, it was suggested to me that I might talk a bit about the nature and history of conservative support for employee ownership, since that's something I've been doing some reporting on recently. Maybe my remarks are, I was not at the sessions yesterday, so, and if there was a Sanders staffer quoting Reagan, maybe my remarks here are superfluous and redundant, but nonetheless, I did bring along, this is not the actual letter, a letter that Louis Kelso, who was the person who originally designed the concept of the employee stock ownership plan, wrote to Ronald Reagan in December of 1980, shortly after Reagan was elected, shortly before Reagan took office. He says, "Your election as President of the United States is the only event in the grim national and international economic scene which promises a glimmer of hope." Now, I know what you might be thinking. Maybe he says that to all the incoming presidents. It's a great way to butter people up. I use it all the time. But it's, in fact, he went on to make a specifically conservative case for employee ownership and said, "A conservative society is one in which the entire population makes an effort to perpetuate itself and its institutions. There has never been such a thing. Only societies with minorities who are conservative because only they have income-producing wealth to conserve, and who are therefore pitted against a majority who do not." The object of his plans, he said, was to spread more capital ownership to that majority, and therefore speedily create a conservative society. Now, why did Kelso think that Reagan might be receptive to this? Well, for one thing, he had met with Reagan before when Reagan was governor of California, because Reagan had an aide, Peter Hannaford, who was a big employee ownership advocate. And in fact, Reagan had given a speech in 1974, which I'm pretty sure Hannaford wrote, in which, at Bohemian Grove of all places, where he called for what he called an Industrial Homestead Act, which would expand capital ownership more broadly, and he particularly looked at employee ownership as a way to do that. And a year later, he issued a commentary that said a lot of the same things and name-checked Kelso specifically. So Kelso had reason to believe that he might be receptive. And in fact, Reagan did do some things as president. In 1984, he signed the Deficit Reduction Act that included a little proviso tucked away in there that expanded tax benefits for banks and others lending for employee purchases. That didn't come from the White House. That came from a left-right alliance on Capitol Hill, but he signed it. And the Reagan administration put out a report a little later. It's a fascinating document, sort of putting forward worker ownership as an alternative to state socialism in Latin America and the Caribbean. And there was some discussion of doing something similar vis-a-vis the Solidarity Revolt in Poland, although that made it to the National Security Council. As far as I can tell, it didn't make it any further. And I'm not saying all this to try to make an argument for Ronald Reagan as the secret champion of worker power. The more important thing is that he had people close to him who did sincerely. I don't know how sincere or how close this was to his heart, but there were people around him that was close to their heart, and it was close to their heart for conservative reasons. People like Hannaford, people like Norman Bailey, like John McClary, who was an advocate not just of ESOPs, but of cooperatives and self-management, who were, and for that matter, people who in Congress, who we ordinarily think of as conservatives or sometimes coming from the right wing of libertarianism, who have repeatedly introduced legislation like this. Dana Rohrabacher would be one example. And what were the reasons that they had for coming to this? In some cases, it was the idea that Kelso put forward in his letter, that this was a way of giving people a greater stake in the society and wanting to conserve it. In other cases, it was the idea that this might be a way of sort of a socially responsible approach to privatization and having labor feeling like they have a stake in introducing things to the market. In fact, Hannaford, 2 years before that speech he probably wrote, he ran for Congress in Berkeley, and that was part of his platform, sort of ESOP-based privatization. He lost to Ron Dellums, who was also interested in employee ownership from a rather different ideological direction. I think that's like the most Berkeley race possible, an ESOP Republican against a DSA Democrat. In some cases, obviously, there's a lot of interest on the right in entrepreneurship, and that can lead people to these ideas. And there's also an interest sometimes in devolving power. Now, generally, the idea of devolving both governmental and corporate power is something that, if you're thinking of people outside the conventional left, that talking about it, it's going to be a certain sort of libertarian, kind of on the left wing of the libertarian spectrum. But recently, on the populist right, some of the same ideas have come up. And in general, there are so many different motives here and so many different contexts. I mean, I mentioned the new right, that most of the folks I've discussed are talking about this in an open market, free market way. In the new right, it's more likely to be in the context of industrial policy. You have bring in the people with their notions who are coming from the left or coming from the center. You might have so many contexts and so many varieties of the idea that you run a bit of a risk that you can have a broad-based spectrum of people who like the idea in an abstract but can't necessarily unite around a common platform. But fortunately, this is called 5 Big Ideas and not 5 detailed proposals for a broad-based cross-ideological platform. So I'm off the hook. I'm leaving it to you to figure out how to bring people together. Thank you.
I don't know who made the decision to have me go last. Now, why isn't that going in there the way it's supposed to? Because I can tell you that I would rather not. I use my hands crazy, so we don't need that. Okay, push it down, thank you. I'm going last, and I'm listening to a lot of great ideas that are here today. So we have a lot to think about. I know I certainly have a lot to think about. And some of what's been brought up, I too will bring up these ideas. So I'm Leslie Wilson. I'm Dean of the David W. Wilson College of Business at the University of Northern Iowa. UNI is proudly the alma mater of one of our longest serving senators, and that's Senator Charles Grassley. And I will say my husband and his coffee club have coffee at a particular location every morning, and oftentimes he is right there with them in the same room, not at the same table, but having coffee at that location. What I like even better is the fact that his wife is a graduate of the business college with a degree in accounting, which Accounting Today recognizes you and I as having the highest CPA pass rate in the nation. So very proud of the work that we're doing. Thank you to the Aspen Institute. Thank you to Rutgers for inviting me to speak today, share my perspectives on the role of higher education, and especially regional public universities like UNI in the advancement of employee ownership as a business model. Regional public universities, which you may or may not know, are really economic engines for the regions in which they reside. 70% of all undergraduates go to regional public institutions. Okay? We have a huge impact on our regions, on our states. Now in Iowa, small to medium-sized businesses generate almost 46% of Iowa employment. And in rural counties, that is closer to 55%. Nationally, as you guys probably know, 75% of business owners want to retire in the next 10 years, and Iowa's silver tsunami makes that percentage even higher. However, as you also know, for those businesses that want to sell, only about 20 to 30% of those businesses will actually find a buyer. More often, it's going to be closing the door. Those sold often move assets to different communities. They become absorbed, and they're gone out of the community. We lose employees engaged in the community, supporting our schools, providing leadership, spending locally. They're gone. The impact on rural communities is a downward economic spiral. Many of you are from Midwestern states where you're seeing this going on. And for Iowa, most of Iowa is rural. Even our urban areas aren't urban like you guys from New York think about, okay? We're much smaller. Supporting economic growth through teaching, through research, and through outreach is a key component of the Wilson College mission. We talk about this, we articulate this. Employee ownership is now a tool to support this mission. Our first business college dean, Robert Waller, yes, author of Bridges of Madison County. You never thought that a business dean could write a romance novel, but it happened. Actually started research, or started our outreach programs, such as our Institute for Decision Making, to support economic development in Iowa communities. Today, this work resides in a unit associated with the business college called Business and Community Services. Our outreach unit has an annual impact exceeding $30 million annually, engaging in projects in all 99 Iowa counties and 37 states. We're not just in Iowa. We've built on that success by launching the Iowa Center for Employee Ownership to become the 21st state center in Employee Ownership Expansion Network. The Ford and Kauffman Foundations have invested in our efforts, recognizing that our unique portfolio of business-focused centers are effectively responding to Iowa business needs. We've already heard one big idea today is closing the awareness gap, and that is the mission of our Iowa CEO. We're determined to do that. Research can also play a very important role in impacting employee ownership. Research provides insight to all facets of employee ownership. It impacts classroom teaching, and it helps policymakers understand how policy and law can advance this business ownership model and keep small and medium-sized businesses inside their communities. Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing provides leadership in advancing that research, and we have partnered with Rutgers and the Ford Foundation to support our faculty extending their research into employee ownership. And how might that be an opportunity to look at ways at simplifying the process of getting there? Tammy's idea. Our third mission component, and the most important to me, is teaching. At UNI, 70% of our graduates begin their careers in the state of Iowa, with many finding employment in small and medium-sized businesses. However, as I looked in, my academic background is not finance. My academic background is focused on information systems and supply chain. So that's what I tend to study. So employee ownership, as I'm looking at it, is not an idea I study. So I looked into a typical book that is used in our Introduction to Corporation Finance, and this is the book that all of our business students take, every single one of them, regardless of the major, and there's not one mention of employee ownership. Not one. Looked at a book that's targeted to intermediate finance students, and there was a single chapter on ESOPs. There was no mention of employee cooperatives and employee ownership trust, and one of those 1% case studies that you talked about was a case study on an ESOP failure. Okay, that really helps there. So the curriculum is ignoring this particular topic, but I see that it holds the potential of increasing awareness for that next leader of businesses today. So there is a considerable gap. UNI is committed to working with other academic leaders in the employee ownership space to develop broad-based solutions and curriculum to support that. In our discussions concerning a student entrepreneur who designed her business to work and engage and equip young women for their futures, a Deloitte partner on my advisory board shared his belief that there is nothing more philanthropic than providing a person a job. We have many retiring business owners who want to ensure that their employees keep their jobs. We have ideas about how to do that. So our mission at the University of Northern Iowa is to provide the outreach, the research, and the curriculum to ensure that employee ownership is an effective tool for doing just that. So thank you.
Thank you all. Please join me in thanking our speakers once again for those ideas.